Chapter 6 continued. I was leaving the songhouse. The thought made her shudder. Not that way. I will not leave the songhouse that way. Leaving the songhouse will not be the end of my life. She did not believe it, and, not believing, she gripped the stone and wanted not to ever let go. The room was cold. It made her numb, motionless as she was, and the whine of the wind through the spaces in the roof and the rush of wind through the windows made her afraid in a new way, as if someone were watching her. She turned. There was no one, just the bundles of clothing and books and stone benches, and a foot sticking out from under one of the benches of clothing, and the foot was blue, and she went over to it, and discovered that the bundle of clothing was the misshapen, incredibly thin body of Niv, who was dead, frozen in the wind from the winter outside. His eyes were open, and he stared at the stone in front of his face. Kya whimpered, but then reached down and pulled on his hip, as if to wake him. He rolled onto his back, but an arm stuck up in the air, and the legs moved only a little, and she knew he was dead, that the entire time she had been in the room, he had been dead. The Songmaster in the high room died only rarely. She had never known another. It was Niv who had ultimately decided her fate. He had declared her deaf, and decided she would leave the songhouse without songs. She had hated him in her heart, though she had only talked to him a few times, ever since she was 8. But now she only felt repulsed by the corpse, and more than that, disgusted at the way he had died. Was the room always kept this bitterly cold? How had he lived so long? Was this some part of the discipline, that the ruler of the songhouse lived in such squalor and misery? If this emaciated, frozen corpse was the pinnacle of what the songhouse could produce, Kya was not impressed. The lips were parted and the tongue lolled forward, blue and ghastly. This tongue, she thought, was once part of a song, reputed to be the most masterful song in the galaxy, perhaps in the universe. But what had the song been, if not the throat and lips and teeth and lungs, all now cold? If not the brain, that now was still? She could not sing because of lips and teeth and throat and lungs, and because in her own mind she was not so single-minded that she could be what the songhouse demanded. But did it matter? She did not feel triumphant that Niv was dead. She was old enough to know that she, too, would be dead. And if she had a century ahead of her, it only meant time in which she might end up just as accidentally cruel as Niv had been. Kya did not pretend to unusual virtue, just unusual value, which no one but her recognized. And it occurred to her that Niv's failure to recognize who and what she was, or had he indeed recognized it, did not change her. She left him, went downstairs to find the blind in charge of maintenance, an old man named Harai, who rarely left his office. "Niv is dead," she told him, wondering if her happiness sounded in her voice, but knowing that Harai would not be likely to read her very well, being a blind. "Can't let anyone hear that I'm happy," she thought, "because I'm not rejoicing at his death, only at my life." "Dead?" Imperturbable Harai only sounded mildly surprised. "Well then, you must go tell his successor." Harai leaned down over his table and began worrying his pen, back and forth across the page. "But Harai," Kya said. "But what?" "Who is Niv's successor?" "The next Songmaster of the High Room," he said. "Of course." "Of course nothing! How should I know who that is? How am I supposed to figure it out if you don't tell me?" Harai looked up, more surprised this time than he had been at the news of Niv's death. "Don't you know how this works?" "How should I? I'm a deaf. I never got past groan." "Well, you needn't act so upset about it. It isn't exactly a secret, you know. Whoever finds the body will know, that's all. Whoever finds that the Songmaster in the High Room is dead will know." "How will I know?" "It will be obvious to you. Just go and tell him or her that he or she is supposed to take care of funeral arrangements. It's all that simple. But you really ought to act quickly. The songhouse shouldn't be long without someone in the high room." He turned back to his work, with a finality that told Kya she must leave, must be about her business, certainly must not bother him any more. She left, and wandered the halls. She had thought to be quit of the songhouse in a matter of months, the least important person ever to have been there, and suddenly she was supposed to choose the leader of the place. What kind of crazy system is this, she thought, and what the hell kind of rotten luck for me, of all people? But it was not rotten luck, and as she wandered through the stone corridors, all of them chilly with the winter outside, She realized that no one ever came to the high room unbidden except maintenance people, and all the maintenance people were deafs or blinds, those who had not made it into the highest reaches of the singing folk. They could not sing, they could not teach, and so it was left to one of them to stumble across the body and, being impartial, not a member of the eligible group, choose fairly the person who obviously should be the songmaster in the high room. Who? She went to the common rooms and saw the teachers moving among the classes, and knew that she could not suddenly elevate a teacher above his rank. It was tempting to be whimsical, to take vengeance on the songhouse by naming an incompetent to head it, but it would be cruel to the incompetent so-called, and she couldn't destroy someone that way. She knew enough to know that it was just as cruel to lift someone above where he ought to be, as it was to force him to stay below his true station. I won't cause misery. But the songmasters, the logical group to choose from, she knew none of them, except by reputation. On, a gifted teacher and singer, but always assigned as a consultant to everybody, because he couldn't live with the necessity of keeping a fixed schedule, meeting with obnoxious people, and making, of all things, decisions. Much better to give advice. No, Owen was not the one anyone would expect, though he was by far the nicest. And Chufyan was too old, far too old. He would not be long behind Niv. In fact, just as Fry had told her, the choice was obvious, but not one she enjoyed, not at all. Este, who was cold to everyone, except for the little boy she was promoting as a possibility for McCall's songbird. Este, who had reached down into the common room and lowered herself to be a teacher, when she had been administrator of half the songhouse, all for the sake of a little boy. No one made such great sacrifices for me, Kia thought bitterly. But Este was a great singer, one who could light fires in every heart in the songhouse, or quench those fires, if she wanted to. And Este was above the petty jealousies and competitions that were endemic to the songhouse. Este was above such things in her attitude, and now she would be above them in station too. Kia stopped a master, who was quite surprised at having a deaf interrupt her, and asked where she might find Este. With Ansett, with the boy. And where is he? In his stall. Stall. The boy had been promoted. He couldn't be more than 6 yet, and he was already in stalls and chambers. It turned Kia's mouth down, her stomach dull, but in a moment she brightened again. The boy had been advanced by Este, that's all. He would be in the songhouse all his life, except for a few years as a performer, while she would be free, could see all of two, more, could see other planets, could go perhaps to Earth itself, where McCall ruled the universe in indescribable glory. A few questions, a few directions. She found Ansett's stall, identical to all the others except for a number on the door. Inside she could hear singing. It was conversation. She knew when it was song talk. Este was inside then. Kia knocked. Who? Came the answer. From the boy, not from the songmaster. Kia, with a message for Songmaster Este. The door opened. The boy, who was far smaller than Kia, let her in. Este sat on the stool by the window. The room was bleak, bare wooden walls on 3 sides, a cot, a stool, a table, and the stone wall framing the single window that opened onto the courtyard. Every stall was interchangeable with any other, but Kia would once have given her soul to have a stall, and all that it implied. The boy was 6. Your message? Este was as cold as ever. Her robe swirled around her feet as she sat absolutely erect on the stool. Este, I have come from the high room. He wants me? He is dead. Este's face betrayed nothing. She had control. He is dead, Kia said again, and I hope you will take care of the funeral arrangements. Este sat in silence for a moment before she answered. You found the body? Yes. You have done me no kindness, Este said, and she rose and left the room. What now? Kia wondered, as she stood near the door of Ansett's stall. She had not thought beyond informing Este. She had expected some reaction, expected at least to be told what to do. Instead she stood here, in the stall with a boy who was the opposite of her, the epitome of success, where she had met nothing but failure. He looked at her inquiringly. What does this mean? It means, said Kia, that Este is Songmaster in the high room. The boy showed no sign of response. Control, thought Kia, that damnable control. Does it mean anything to you? she demanded. What should it mean? Ansett asked, and his voice was a web of innocence. It should mean a little gloating at least, boy, Kya answered, with the contempt the hopelessly inferior can freely use when the superior is helpless. Este's been pampering you every step of the way, leading you up without having to go through the pain everyone goes through. And now she has all the power it takes. You'll be a songbird, little boy. You'll sing for the greatest people in the galaxy, and then you'll come home. And your Este will see to it you never have to bother with being a friend or a tutor. You'll just step right into teaching, or being a master, or perhaps, why not, a high master right from the start. And before you're 20, you'll be a songmaster. So why don't you forget your control and let it show? This is the best thing that's ever happened to you. Her voice was bitter and angry, with no hint of music in it, not even the dark music of rage. Ansett regarded her placidly, then opened his mouth, not to speak, but to sing. At first she decided to leave immediately. Soon she was incapable of deciding anything. Kya had heard many singers before, but no one had sung to her like this. There were words, but she did not hear words. Instead she heard kindness, and understanding, and encouragement. In Ansett's song she was not a failure. She was, in fact, a wise woman who had done a great favor for the Songhouse, who had earned the love of all future generations. She felt proud. She felt that the Songhouse would send her out, not in shame, but as an emissary to the worlds outside. I will tell them of the music, she thought, and because of me, the Songhouse will be held in even greater esteem by everyone who knows of it, for I am as much a product of the Songhouse as any singer or songbird. She was bursting with joy, with pride. She had not been so happy in years, in her life. She embraced the boy, and wept for several minutes. If this is what Ansett can do, he is worth all the praise he has been given, she thought. Why, the boy is full of love, even for me. Even for me. And she looked up into his eyes, and saw nothing. He regarded her as placidly as he had before. Control. He had let out the song, and that was all. There was nothing human about him when he wasn't singing. He knew what she wanted to hear. He had given it to her, and that was all he needed to do. Did they wind you up? She said to the blank face. Wind me up? You may be a singer, she said angrily, but you aren't human. He began to sing again, the tones already soothing, but Kya leaped to her feet, backed away. Not again! You can't trick me again! Sing to the stones and make them cry, but I won't have you fooling me again! She fled from the room, slamming shut the door on his song, on his empty face. The child was a monster, not real at all, and she hated him. She also remembered his song, and loved him, and longed to return to his stall, and hear him sing forever. That very day she pleaded with Este to let her go early, to let her leave before she ever had to hear Ansett sing again. Este looked confused, asked for an explanation. Kya only insisted again that if she wasn't allowed to go, she'd kill herself. You can go tomorrow, then, the new songmaster in the high room said. Before the funeral? Why before the funeral? Because he'll sing then, won't he? Este nodded. His song will be beautiful. I know, Kya said, and her eyes filled with tears at the memory. But it won't be a human being singing it. Goodbye. We'll miss you, Este said softly, and the words were tender. Kya had been leaving, but she turned to look Este in the eye. Oh, you sound so sweet. I can see where Ansett learned it. A machine teaching a machine. You misunderstand, said Este. It is pain teaching pain. What else do you think the control is for? But Kya was gone. She saw neither Este nor Ansett again before the tram took her and her luggage, and her first month's money away from the Songhouse. I'm free, she said softly, when she passed the gate leading to 2, and the farms opened before her. You're a liar, answered the rhythm of the engines. The spaces in the roof and the rush of wind through the windows made her afraid in a new way, as if someone were watching her. She turned. There was no one, just the bundles of clothing and books and stone benches, and a foot sticking out from under one of the benches of clothing, and the foot was blue, and she went over to it, and discovered that the bundle of clothing was the misshapen, incredibly thin body of Niv, who was dead, frozen in the wind from the winter outside. His eyes were open, and he stared at the stone in front of his face. Kya whimpered, but then reached down and pulled on his hip, as if to wake him. He rolled onto his back, but an arm stuck up in the air, and the legs moved only a little, and she knew he was dead, that the entire time she had been in the room, he had been dead. The Songmaster in the high room died only rarely. She had never known another. It was such squalor and misery. If this emaciated, frozen corpse was the pinnacle of what the Songhouse could produce, Kya was not impressed. The lips were parted and the tongue lolled forward, blue and ghastly. This tongue, she thought, was once part of a song, reputed to be the most masterful song in the galaxy, perhaps in the universe. But what had the song been, if not the throat and lips and teeth and lungs, all now cold, if not the brain? Chapter 6 continued. I was leaving the Songhouse. The thought made her shudder. Not that way. I will not leave the Songhouse that way. Leaving the Songhouse will not be the end of my life. She did not believe it, and, not believing, she gripped the stone and wanted not to ever let go. The room was cold. It made her numb, motionless as she was, and the whine of the wind through the Niv who had ultimately decided her fate. He had declared her deaf, and decided she would leave the Songhouse without songs. She had hated him in her heart, though she had only talked to him a few times, ever since she was 8. But now she only felt repulsed by the corpse, and more than that, disgusted at the way he had died. Was the room always kept this bitterly cold? How had he lived so long? Was this some part of the discipline, that the ruler of the Songhouse lived in